Father Moss back with another class on how the church built civilization. And last time I was talking about the monks and about education. And the monks, of course, were informed by Catholic sensibilities in terms of charity. And they, they made a lot of money through their various inventions and discoveries, especially the wool trade. They made tons of money. But they were very charitable about it. They spent the money on the people. So the people loved their monks, and the monks loved the people. And I just thought that's ideal. I wish we could go back to those days. But as a matter of fact, some people, I've seen some books out that how do we rebuild Christendom, it's called, by getting the Benedictines and the Irish monks. Well, no more Irish monks, and the Benedictines are not as big an order as they used to be. But the idea that monasteries and so forth is, and massive educational schemes can reinvigorate the Catholic culture. So that's how experts are thinking about it. As a matter of fact. But I talked about how they established education for children and adults both, with teaching the innovations of agriculture and technology and so forth. And for children, almost every monastery around had a school for children. Unfortunately, those children were boys. The medieval culture was not really interested in educating women. You know, women were educated in domestic arts, as we might say. In other words, cooking and washing and all those horrible labors that women have to endure. I mean, they didn't have Maytag washing machines in those days. But anyway, but on a higher level, I talked about that last time, and that would be the universities, and that's at a higher level of education. And the church desperately needed educators to work through all kinds of questions about the faith. I mean, that's theology is basically revelation seeking understanding. You know, they take things that are revealed in the Bible, and then theologians try to explain it. For example, a big one was the Trinity. I mean, the Father is mentioned often, the Son is mentioned, the Holy Spirit, but there was no unifying theory of the Trinity. You will not find the word Trinity in the Bible, but you find it in the church because theologians, mapped that all out so that people could understand it. St. Augustine did it. The Trinitate, which is a book on the Trinity, is very interesting, but I don't find it very helpful. But nonetheless, there are many more. St. Patrick's, a technique of holding up a shamrock and say one leaf with three different. Well, actually, history says he didn't really use that. That's just a myth that's come down to us. But anyway, explaining the faith. But that was the beginning of universities, and they were not done out of monasteries. They were done out of cathedral schools, and they were like-minded folks that began to build a faculty. And so you find, for example, at Oxford, what they call natural philosophy, which is basically science, and the University of Paris, which is mostly theology. And the University of Cologne, for example, is also natural science. But way in the south, we have schools of law schools, for example, Salamanca in Spain, and Bologna in Italy. And the reason for that is in those days, the Mediterranean countries were the explorers, the ones who were setting up empires or colonialism out of Spain and Portugal and Italy. And so they were dealing with all different nations of people and different differences in culture and so forth. So that would motivate them to establish international law and then civil law, and all of that comes out of canon law, because the first law in Europe was really canon law, because the church being so diverse and so big, and have to cover so many issues. There were a lot of rules that had to be built around sacraments. And if you read a canon law book today, I'd say 5/7 of it, or 6/8 of it, is about marriage. Lots of rules about who can marry and who can't, and what is, constitutes a marriage bond, and what doesn't, and all that stuff. I don't know if it, for example, people that the degrees of sanguinity, that is, you can't marry your cousin, but you can marry your third cousin. You can't marry your second cousin, but you can marry your third cousin. And that still holds true, For example, the English royalty, they're related to each other all over. Queen Victoria had many children, and she married them off to many of the royals of Europe. So they were all very much related to each other. So they have to be careful about what princes they choose, because they might have been, not good for the bloodline. As a matter of fact, Queen Victoria was a carrier of hemophilia, and so the Tsar of Russia, for example, his boys, because it's transmitted by the X chromosome. His boy was had hemophilia, and they were cousins of Queen Victoria. They're all the same. I don't know if you know this, but the British hierarchy and royals, they're not even English. They're Germans. So they changed the name to Windsor during the war because Germany wasn't real popular during the war. But anyway, I'm way off the subject, which delights me. People like it when I get off the subject. Anyway, some of the leaders in terms of educating and setting up systems of education were, for example, Alcuin, the monk Alcuin, who is from York in England, was Charlemagne's main advisor, and he established a system of religious education for all of the realm, which was, all of Charlemagne's realm, which is mostly France and Germany, that sort of thing. And he was very good at it, and established a system by which everybody learned their Christian faith. It was really remarkable. Another person that is not well known, but reformed Spain entirely. Have you ever wondered why the Reformation was in Northern Europe and never in Spain? And in the South in general, was because they were already reformed. They had great reformations in those places. And a famous name is Jimenez de Cisneros in Spain. Established a system of religious education because they felt that they couldn't combat heresy and the dissolution of the church in terms of attendance and so forth. Were very, very rigorous and reteaching, retraining the population, starting in childhood. So every village, every city in Spain had religious education classes, and that did the job. And to this day, the Spaniards and so forth, the Portuguese, they're ardent Christians. They really are to this day. Of course, they've had their losses, as all Christian countries have, but they're still more Catholic than the rest of Europe. So that was a great thing to happen. So I want to talk a little bit about law. I mentioned that in the South the universities had law schools. There was in the Spanish world, they debated the rights of citizens, and there was a very famous uh, Spaniard. I'm having trouble remembering his name right now because the name Cisneros is stuck in my mind now. And when you're over the hill and losing your mind, I can't remember it. De las Casas. De las Casas. He argued against a Spaniard by the name of Sepulveda. And the reason I remember Sepulveda, have I said this before? Sepulveda there's a famous street in Los Angeles called Sepulveda Boulevard, and it's on the way to the airport, so that's why I remember Sepulveda. Sepulveda said it was okay to enslave native people because they were an inferior breed. They were closer to being animals, and as such, it was permissible to do so. They weren't really capable of being true citizens anyway. And then De las Casas, Bartolome de las Casas says, he argued in the Spanish court before the king that it's a matter of what they call potentiality. Yes, they were less civilized in a Spanish sense than the Spaniards, but that's because they never had any opportunity to learn otherwise. And I'm always reminded of a very famous film called The Mission. The mission's about the Jesuit missionaries, the Portuguese Jesuits in South America, and there's a scene where they have an Indian boy who's about 10 years old standing on a platform and singing this beautiful voice soprano. Not ballads, but cantos from Catholic music, and it was absolutely gorgeous sounding. But the Spaniards, the Portuguese who were in charge, they said, see, they can be taught, and the Portuguese said, well, you can train a parrot to do the same thing, because they wanted them to be enslaved and work to death in the mines and in the fields. There were two sides of colonization. The Spaniards and the Portuguese, in many cases, were very harsh and very much into exploiting the people for profit. But on the other hand, the church was very much, everywhere you look, was very much involved in protecting the native people. But anyway, De las Casas' argument held sway, and it was mentioned in various places. I don't know if you remember the Supreme Court, the Dred Scott case. That was the very same argument. Blacks cannot be citizens because they're of an inferior nature, and the argument was they are behind it because they haven't been given the opportunity, but they have the potentiality. They can learn like anybody else because they're all the same species. We're all human beings, and of course, in recent years history, the blacks have proven that to be true. There are many blacks. There's a lot of injustice still against African Americans or whatever they like to be called now. But they have proven very much as a race in the United States to be fully capable of achieving as much as anybody else. So there you go. That was a gift from the Spaniards and for the Spanish law courts and what is taught in universities. So, and the whole idea of rights in itself, people have rights by virtue of their Christian dignity as being created by God. And so there's certain rights. And that's why women's rights were improved during the Middle Ages, or so the age of faith, I like to call it. Because women, and I did tell them that a lot of it had to do with the age of chivalry, if you remember, because knights took on fighting for the honor of women, and because they were knights and aristocrats and stuff, other men followed example. and began to treat women with a lot of honor and respect. And then also mirrors, of course, the Catholic doctrine of Our Lady, doctrines of Our Lady, because every Catholic loved the Blessed Virgin Mary, and that transfers over to respect for women. And then, of course, the culture of life. Children were considered a real blessing in the age of faith, and a real opportunity to have help in the fields and so forth, because disease was also rampant. And respect for women also implied women who risked their lives to have children, because women died in childbirth in rather large numbers. It was really scary to be pregnant and then have a child. You didn't know if you were going to make it or not. And so all of those things constituted a desire to be more respectful and appreciative of the role of women in society. And so we have then all of these improvements, and it all comes out of following the cross, the self-giving, sacrificial love of Jesus for all of us. And that was taught very, very strongly by the Mass, because the Mass is the offering up of the body and blood of Christ who gave himself on the cross. But it was very evident in Catholic culture. They had what they call the Passion Plays around Lent and around Easter time. Every village and every city had Passion Plays, and that's been carried on in the Catholic world. For example, when I was in Texas, down in San Antonio, out right in front of the cathedral, the Mission Cathedral in San Antonio, they had very elaborate Passion Plays. And if you go to Germany, they have a very famous Passion Play in I forget where it is now, but it only happens once every 10 years. And I got lucky because I went with the choir to Germany and got to see it, because we got to down an even number of years. It was Omar Ramagao is the name of the place, the Passion Play. There's one in South Dakota, Spearfish, South Dakota, has a big town Passion Play, and it's like the one in Germany. The town citizens are the ones who put on the play. And so those things are still with us. But the people, if there's anything that's evident in the development of an understanding of Catholic charity and the image of Jesus, it was everywhere. The plays depicted in the sculpture on the cathedrals, and as a matter of fact, the cathedrals, the great and beautiful cathedrals, were actually built for the purpose of housing the Mass. That's the main reason, because the Mass was the center of their lives, and it was made as beautiful as it could. Now, I've always wanted to make the Masses I celebrated beautiful, but I've never been able to pull it off. I do see a lot of people sleeping though, so it must lull them to sleep, at least by sermons. I mean, they tell me that it helps them get their naps, their church. But anyway, music, for example, really took off in the church, and the idea of choirs. Western music is really built on the Middle Ages and the idea of Gregorian chants. I think I mentioned that last time. Gregorian chants is the basis of all Western civilization music, and they had great choirs. The monasteries had great choirs, and they didn't have any women. So the boys, before their voices changed, they sang the higher registered parts for the choirs. And of course, those boys quickly grew up and knew how to sing, and so that was a big part of it. Then they took part in adult choirs, and we see that even today. You see that especially in Europe. Europe has really housed a thing for boys' choirs and children's choirs everywhere In England, for example, all these cathedrals, remember the cathedral of Queen Elizabeth just recently in Westminster Abbey. They had a choir, including the boys for the higher part. And they really lend a lot to the glory of the music, the beauty of the music. You see that in France, and you see that in Germany. As a matter of fact, in Regensburg, Pope Benedict's brother, George, George was, I don't know how to say it in German, but he was the director of the Regensburg Boys Choir. And and there was a little criticism of him because he could be a little bit harsh. But then we're talking Germany here, so of course we got to be harsh. So, but anyway, but that was a bit of a scandal around Benedict when he was Pope, and but Benedict as well was a musically inclined genius. He was not only one of the best theologians known in history. People don't know that about Benedict XVI, formerly known as Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger. They don't know that he's one of the smartest theologians we've had in the history of the church. And he's wrote. Yeah, I've really learned it. He's wrote the book. Anyway, wonderful books and a great teacher because as smart as he is, he knows how to make it understandable to the average reader. So he's just wonderful. But he was also a great pianist and musician, as well as his brother. So we have this thing in Europe of the music in the church is very important. And to this day, I mean, they told me in the seminary, if you're not nice to anybody in the parish, well, okay, but be nice to your musicians because if they quit, you're up the creek without a paddle. Because listen, Father Moss, you're a lousy singer yourself. So, but actually, I used to sing before, and I'm a pretty good singer, but not a lead singer. I can't carry a tune in the basking, so. But the same thing is, well, today we have, Cherie is not with me today. Cherie's is not filming this. And it's going to be very difficult to say goodbye to Cherie. Today is her second last day in the office, and then Friday we're going to go out to lunch to say goodbye to her. We've already said goodbye to her almost every day for the last 3 months, and we had the parish farewell for her as well. And the command chaplain's office is going to also, we're going out to say to lunch and say goodbye to her as well. But in her absence, and as her replacement, Tiffany Eastman is now filming it. And this Tiffany is pretty good. I mean, she is really, be nice to her. It's sort of like the choir. If you're not nice to her, what else are we going to do, Because we need her. We need her. And you're doing a really good job. It's nice to have you. I just thought I'd throw that in because come next week, she's going to be the woman. But I can tell you, she's just as nice as Cherie is. As you know, Cherie is a wonderfully nice person. But so is Tiffany. I'm not so nice, but I don't really want to be. So so my goal in life is to become a cranky old priest, and I think I'm retaining my goal. So, all right. So, are we done? I think I'm done. So, nice talking with you. And just on the classes, I'm going to continue my in-person class because the numbers are increasing, and I just live for that. I love teaching in a group, much more than talking to a camera. So if we get enough people going to the class, they may stop the videos. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time. You hear? Y'all come back. You hear? Bye.